On today's World Insight, in-depth insights from Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim and PwC Global Chair Bob Moritz about the global economy and the state of the world at the recent APEC CEO Summit Forum. What are the tallest hurdles? What will it take to fix them?
So how are we looking at the state of the economy of this region?
And let's be fair here for a second. The amount of trade between the two countries and the importance of the two countries to the world, very, very important.
So why then put us in the fix, in the zero-sum game?
I'm so glad that I'm joined by a very capable international business leader, Bob Moritz, Global Chairman of PwC. What do you think might be some of the latest signs that could help us to analyze better about the real state of the global economy? Please.
Yeah. What has happened over the last few years is organizations have worried about the concentration risk in supply chains, the resiliency of supply chains, and other aspects like that. Many governments are trying to incent more onshoring as well from a policy perspective. But the CEO community, the C-suite, is continued to focus on four major themes. Are the economics right? Do I have the resiliency and agility of that supply chain from a particular organization and or country? Can I actually be greener and cleaner? And likewise, can I get the data to make faster, better decisions? So the two new things right now are the green element of that supply chain and the data. And that's where digitization, technology, and AI will be really important for management teams to think about how can we create opportunities for people to use our supply chains, either corporates or the countries that are actually providing them.
Right.
And that's where the upside is going forward for countries and companies.
What do you think the business leaders would like to say to the political leaders that are coming here during the APEC week? What is likely to be the common ground between the business community and the political leaders?
So let me take this from three angles. First, as it relates to particularly the big elephant in the room, the China-US relationships, what we're looking for is a de-escalation and more bringing the temperature down in terms of a little bit more normalcy. It can never necessarily be totally normal, but a little bit more normalcy than the tension-filled world that we've had, particularly over the last year since we were last together. Second is the signs that there's a willingness and a wanting to actually continue the trade. And last but not least is to make sure that, I'll call it the technocrats, those that should be talking to one another regularly about policy changes and trade agreements and other aspects, are able to talk more freely to enable the infrastructure and trade and direct investment to actually move forward. And that's the importance of today. The second point, though, is let's not limit this to just the US and China. The reason this particular group of people together is exactly that, which is how do I get more policies and procedures in place, more certainty in place to actually move forward. And last but not least, is the third element here is how do you indicate the signs of the direction of travel? Because when you're making decisions on supply chain, you're thinking about not only the conditions that exist today, but the conditions that will exist over the next 3-5 years, because you're looking for that stability.
What does it take to have real dialogues?
Yeah. The reality is, though, you want to enable trust. And trust means you have to deliver on what you committed to deliver previously. And that's equally as important. So it's one thing to have dialogue and discussion, but it's another thing to execute and deliver against that dialogue to enable future trust so the foundation is even stronger moving forward. So as we sit here today, the one thing I would say is discussion isn't good enough. It's the execution of getting things done that's going to be equally important to enable that trust to continue to sustain itself.
Having said that, though, how are we going to set all of these conversations with the backdrop of the Asia Pacific?
As a business leader, I would say for PwC and for that matter, all of our clients, we see a lot of upside in the region. And you see that upside driven by three primary rationales. One is the domestic economies are continuing to grow. The trends underlying those are very important. As you think about the rise of the consumer and what they need in terms of goods and services. The second thing is that those particular countries and the companies within them are now more alternative sources for supply chain and creation of goods and services, and important to the worldwide economy.
Right.
And that's equally as important. And last but not least, it is not only the issues of the economy, but the contributions that will come from this part of the world as well to future endeavors. Technology, digitization, AI is a good example of that, where the skill sets today are fantastic in the region to actually be leveraged and turned into a big opportunity. So it's not only the economics, it's also the policy setting, the standard setting, and other aspects that are really important. And we hope that the countries in this room, in this cooperative, are more so at the table, at the global table, to make sure that their points of view are being brought and the advances and innovation that are happening here are brought to the rest of the world.
We have seen this Asia-Pacific region very dynamic in bringing consensus. Would that be a wonderful precedence in terms of people coming to consensus on all the technology-related governance as well, particularly regarding generative AI, as you said?
Absolutely.
Where are we now? Once again, the state of the world.
We're at that early stage, but I do think there's an opportunity for the discussions today and what comes out of these meetings to continue to be a role model for the world and then for the world to jump in, but to make sure that we are having them in a very open way, because there is different points of view on this. And back to your point around discussion, it's going to be discussion, agreement, and then ultimately framing this up in the right way for people to apply it at the local level. And I do think there's a big opportunity. Organizations are seeing it today in terms of the amount of innovation that's happening in this part of the world. And I think they're going to want this going forward, because you need that trust in the AI as that becomes both demonstratively important to them to deal with effectiveness and efficiency as we go through a slowing economy and margin improvement. But at the same time, AI is dealing with that and disrupting entirely strategies and business propositions of corporates and, for that matter, countries as well.
And the wonderful thing is, how will the latest AI technologies and governance of it work with the sustainability, which is one of the core issues that we have seen being focused on during this year's APEC CEO Summit. So what do you see is likely to be the synergy here?
There's a first question, which is the definition of sustainability.
Right.
If we're going to think about climate, there's a huge opportunity for how AI can actually help with that. Now let's get very granular for a second. If I'm thinking about the efficiency of a building, there's not enough humans and not enough computing power right now to actually indicate how it can be most effective and efficient in energy use of that particular building. And the AI is powerful enough today, and the computing power is sufficient enough today to do much better than the human decisions can be. There's a tremendous opportunity as a result to think about how can we drive for more efficiency using AI as we think about the energy uses of buildings like this, for example. Having said that, you've got another element of sustainability, and that is the implications to humanity and labor. And as AI comes forward, there's many different doomsday discussions around how many jobs will be taken away from that. And yes, if we don't actually think about how do we enable the AI to be more effective and efficient, while at the same time redeploy the talent in new and different areas, we will have a mismatch, which will create more social unrest, which is something we cannot afford to have. And what we're talking about here is a pretty big timing gap. Humanity has proven over time, anytime there's a large-scale transformation impactful on labor, we have historically been really good sometime thereafter of figuring out what to do with that excess labor capacity and put it into new and different ways. There's an equal need to deal with that innovation as much as it is the use of the AI to think about the supply and the demand of talent. So when we think about sustainability, we should be thinking climate clearly, because we're not doing enough and we are far behind, as will be evidenced in some of the COP discussions coming up. But let's not forget the implications to labor, workforce, and humanity overall as well.
We see geopolitics changes so much over the past few years, and that people are wondering whether we should wait for decisions coming so-called from the big powers, and then we move, or rather we should have parallel passages with different players trying to play their role and trying to bring consensus together. Of course, this means a lot of different chemistries. You know, which one to you as a business leader would likely to work the best?
The reality is we're not in a world where we can afford to wait for the powers to be to make a decision and rely on government alone or anybody else to actually make that decision. Innovation at the local levels, cascaded up and then ultimately scaled up, is the way to make progress. And what we see in the world today is the business community even more so, the concepts within the business community actually driving the innovation, be it the deployment of capital in the AI space or the deployment of finance in the climate space. And we can no longer afford to wait for government policy to agree. That's going to take way too long. So it's actually got to be the combination of business working together more so in their ecosystems to drive the change. And to your point, Tian, the reality is when business does this, it's not just what they do with themselves for themselves. It's what they do with themselves and within the ecosystem they're operating with. And climate's a great example of this, where any individual company can make some decisions, but it's not enough. What they need to do is actually deal with scope 3 and other elements of their supply chain, and to force that to happen and work much more so together. So it's going to be a lot of little things that ultimately they get scaled up to drive the change that's needed to be much more sustainable and achieve the goals we're looking to achieve. We can't afford to wait for some grand decision or a big bang theory that's going to come through to save us.
So how to make sure things like greenwashing, PR, mainly related to the so-called discussions of AI governance, and also, meanwhile, how would business work with political leaders when there are rules that are preventing free trade, that are preventing the flow of data and consensus of data among business and between business and the societies?
First off, as you think about climate, greenwashing, and all the elements of that, you do need a set of standards for what should be reported.
Indeed.
And trust within that, and accountability. To give people a sense, if you look at the European companies today, the top 50 of them, there's rules and regulations about what they should report, and the system hasn't changed. What I mean by that is the incentives for management changes have come to life. What is really interesting, Tian, if you look at last year's discussions, only 1 of 50 CEOs had their compensation impacted because they did not meet the green objectives. 1. So it either tells you we're not putting enough emphasis on that, or our setting of the goal was way too low.
What do you think? Which one?
I actually think it's probably a combination of the two that actually gets you there. But the reality is you have to change the entirety of the system. What is the strategy at a senior level within the C-suite? How are you incenting the right behaviors? Are you having the right necessary data to make the better decisions? And how can you survive and thrive? What's interesting in this part of the world, almost 60% of the CEOs in this part of the world believe their businesses are not going to be sustainable if they don't radically change in the next 10 years. They're going to have to move with speed. They're going to be very agile to deal with these policy decisions that are changing radically and are uncertain. And it's going to be the benefit of those leadership teams that actually are most agile to take advantage of opportunities and mitigate the downside risks. They need better data, quicker decision, less bureaucracy. I'm going to say that's going to be important for corporates as much as it's going to be important for governments.
Mr. Moritz, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Tian.
Thank you so much. Mr. Prime Minister, what a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you, Tian Wei.
What does this region mean, Asia Pacific, in terms of bringing the best to the state of the world, from your perspective?
Thank you, Tian Wei. Should always start with easy questions, not the difficult ones. I'm familiar with Tian Wei for a number of times, and thank you for this opportunity. It's an August Assembly and important players and role You started with this question about the role of political leadership. There's a lot of this of trust deficit among political leaders. And you want a vibrant democracy and to promote development, then the role of the private sector, captains of industry, becomes more pivotal, more relevant, more critical now than ever before. And APEC remains to be one of the more significant and has to play a dynamic role. There have been naysayers, negative perceptions, but I still believe APEC is like the Rock of Gibraltar. It has a role, it has to succeed, and this is one forum that we have the opportunity to engage effectively. To my mind, we in the Asia-Pacific look forward to this engagement because it would be an immense benefit to the region and to the world.
What do you hope, exact hope, let's just put it this way, that this meeting could bring to the discussions that we're having right now?
We talk about inclusivity, we talk about and globalization. We have to accept that the global situation, geopolitics, has changed. And we, Malaysia, for example, in the region, do acknowledge that. China has a role and has to be engaged effectively. There must be effort, greater effort, to ensure that it is part of the global community. And well, there is competition, fair. But this engagement, for example, between President Biden and Xi Jinping, to me, it is critical because it should give a clear message that we are here to be able to work together and trust each other to resolve serious problems, climate issues in Ukraine or Gaza. There are too many contentious issues in the world, and you must try and engage, accepting the fact that you may not achieve all the desired results, but this engagement is important to try and establish areas that we can work together. Countries like Malaysia and ASEAN cannot be forced to see the world and the big powers in the Cold War mindset. For the benefit of countries, emerging economies, and also for the West and the East, I believe that the solution is, of course, greater collaboration. And this Cold War mindset must end because the world in the post-normal times is more chaotic, more complex, and full of contradictions. It requires leaders with vision, with commitment, with shared ideals to be able to resolve it effectively.
Let's talk about the economy. Mr. Prime Minister, I know you and your colleagues have been working on that within your own country, but also looking at the region. We see some of the important trade mechanisms working extremely well in the Asia-Pacific region. CPTPP, for example, is one of those. And also we see RCEP as well. So how do you see these kind of trade mechanisms are helping us? And moving forward, we know the difficulties, but still, how can we maintain a certain level of stability and predictability? Earlier, you heard Mr. Moritz coming from the business perspective, asking for that as business leader. So, Mr. Prime Minister.
I don't think we have a choice. We emerge as a relatively more successful country economically, Malaysia, registering 9–10% growth and even budget surplus in the 90s, because ours is a trading nation. Through FTAs those days, the more FTAs we have, the more beneficial it is for the country. Now with new mechanisms in place, we should fully utilize. That is why I say that, and I believe that countries must be able to engage more and accept the fact that a multilateral arrangement is more beneficial. And multilateral arrangement means that countries cannot be marginalized or discriminated for ideological reasons, for other reasons, issue hegemony, whatever. So that is my position. And I think most countries in ASEAN share this view.
Let's talk about some of the synergies among economies in the Asia-Pacific region. Actually, between the North and South, and even among the so-called South itself, there's tremendous synergy going on. I could put on the example between Malaysia and China, but of course that's only one of those many examples. So how do you see these kind of synergy that are already taking place, despite of the fact that we have difficulties geopolitically for the world?
I don't share a view of this bifurcation of contradictions. That's why I always stress upon the new realities, that the old mindset of the Cold War must end. It does not mean it just ended. Look at the COP28. What is our concern? The industrialized, rich countries committed to pay 100 billion and it's not forthcoming. So many other impositions for the emerging economies. And I think, to me, it's unhealthy. We need to, therefore, have an effective mechanism that we will not have this sort of division. Now, and that's why I say I still maintain that the only way forward is to see us as one community. Climate change is not something peculiar to the West or the East. We all suffer immensely. And I even referred to the issues either Ukraine or Gaza. We all suffer. And these issues should not be allowed to further divide, to sow the seed of dissension. And we must have a common vision, I mean, including, of course, the private sector. I don't believe that, at least I see the new dynamics and narratives on CSR, on inclusivity, on justice, on better wages for the workers, on issues of climate. There are total concerns, and these are universal concerns. What we lack in politics, in business, in my humble view, is lack of humanity, lack of compassion.
Mr. Prime Minister, I really enjoyed the quotes that you had from both the saints and the poets. Certainly, they are providing a lot of inspirations for us, but I still have to be pragmatic in my question. We are seeing the coming year, 2024, with many elections going on in the world. These economies, big, small, and yet there's always an issue of how political leaders are going to work on their domestic agenda vis-a-vis the state of the world. So being a responsible player. From your perspective, representing the political leaders, what are some of the important steps do you see that are crucial these days for political leaders?
Of course, there's an interesting quote from Churchill: the statesman thinks of the next, or plans for the next generation, a politician for the next elections.
Do we see more statesmen or do we see more politicians?
I think you need to combine both, Tian. Because you think of the next generation, you will lose the elections. You only think of the next elections, you condemn the next generation. So I think it is important to make sure that both of these concerns are met, that people do understand the vision, the policies, and political decision, however populist, cannot condemn the next generation. I am fortunate in this because we have secured a comfortable two-thirds majority in Parliament, and my election is another 4 years. You expect very tough action and decisions I'm going to make for Malaysia.
I see you're talking from a very neutral perspective right now. Mr. Prime Minister, now we are at an important crossroad. Economies, whether they are big or small, or the so-called middle-sized economies, are all trying to strive with the circumstances they have to deal with. What do you think are some of the most important tools for political leaders like you to work with your business communities and also work on the economic partnerships with your friends and partners in the Asia-Pacific region?
Well, from my limited experience, in the early period, in the 90s as finance minister, And now, I think political stability is very critical. But clarity of policies is what is required. Consistent, clear policies, whether it's energy or economic program or investments, etc. Then, of course, effective implementation. We all talk about ease of doing business. We all talk about one-stop agency. And I used to remind my bureaucrats, the one-stop agency does not mean that it stops there. You know, it means that you have to facilitate and accelerate the process with clear procedures and policies. And I think if that is done, I'm very fortunate, for example, from China, from United States, from Europe, and also the region. We have established or record investments far exceed our projections. I mean, I'm talking about real huge. And this signifies a confidence in the private sector to the way we decide policies and we do business. My take, based on our past experience, is good governance. We must be tough on policies and tough against corruption and this way of doing business, squandering public funds to enrich those in power. And that is made very clear. I think we are on the right track to propel the economy in the country in the next few years. Very ambitious, and I think based on the track record in the last 6-7 months, we can achieve that.
How political leaders like you and your colleagues to make sure that you're not being hijacked by rhetorics, but be able to focus on the real issue and responsible for the next generation, as you said, from Mr. Churchill, Mr. Prime Minister?
Yeah, it's not pious platitudes.
Yeah.
Because finally, you are judged by your action. People do give some allowance in the first few months, grace period, but then they will have to see whether you mean business. All political leaders, all opposition leaders come up and attain power by fighting corruption and abuse of power. The test is when you are in the responsible position, whether you can really deliver. The second, of course, clear economic policies. And you're right, because people become, that's why I started with trust deficit against leaders and political leaders, because the rhetoric, the pious platitudes is not met with concrete action. And thank you very much again. I need your support. Malaysia and ASEAN is the most stable and vibrant place to invest, and I look forward to meeting you individually in Malaysia. God willing, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see you again.
Good to see you again. So how are we looking at the state of the economy of this region?
And let's be fair here for a second. The amount of trade between the two countries and the importance of the two countries to the world, very, very important.
So why then put us in the fix, in the zero-sum game?